Evolution, Chapter 11, Feedback Loop. Once Six was up and about, Rex was more than happy to raid the kitchen with Jen, then pass out for a few hours. The brunette stayed awake, though, working through the scans with Doc Holliday. She frowned as she pulled up one of the original scans from New York. Her eyes widened. Well, I found a problem. And a possible door back home, but we won't need Cesar's shoddy null void gun. Not in a few hours, anyway. Holliday frowned. How do you mean? Providence closed that rift. Jen shook her head. No, they patched it. A cover, but not a solution. It'll crack back open, especially if anyone on the other side's figured out that could be an exit. The null void's an extra-dimensional prison, houses the worst of the worst, and no offense, your world has enough problems. Holliday nodded. I think we'd all like to avoid a prison break. You think you can fix it? Jen tilted her head at the readings. Yeah, it's slamming an energy door. I'll need one of my heavy hitters, but it's doable. How long do we have? Jen seemed to think for a moment, ticking off a few fingers. 3 hours, maybe less. Holliday nodded, flicking on the comms. Rex, get up here. We've got a problem. They made their way to the incident site in New York. Providence had cleared off, claiming victory, but Cesar was there. Jen explained the situation to the scientist, and he nodded. You say you can fix it? Jen nodded. I think so. Hopefully get home at the same time. Rex held out a hand to shake hers when a roar blasted through the trees around them. 3 large, tentacled things with wings that seemed more mouth than anything else swooped out of the trees. Jen swore. Null Guardians. They must be confused. They're not supposed to leave the void. Jen spun the dial on the Ultimatrix and transformed into a greenish-black figure with bright, glowing green hair and white, blank eyes. Her voice echoed slightly as she spoke. I'll reveal the gap. If you can toss them back through, I'll follow them. I should be able to get home from there. Rex nodded and formed his sword. For beings as big as they weren't bright. And it was relatively easy for Rex to toss them into the rip between dimensions that Jen managed to pull open, but it sealed too fast for her to follow, and she swore as she landed. She transformed back to herself and kicked the dirt in front of her. Fuck! That was the only weak point. I'm never getting home, am I? Not true. The voice was formal and made Jen grin as every agent present whirled on the speaker. He was tall, with brown hair and a lab coat. As they watched, he tucked a pocket watch in his pocket and smiled at Jen. None of them had even heard him approach. Sorry it took me so long to find you, Jennifer. You're difficult to locate outside your universe. Shall we? Jen nodded and held out a hand to Rex. You kick ass. We should do this again. He slapped her palm and held up his closed fist. She humored him and bumped it. I didn't get to spend nearly as much time with you as I did with Ben, but you're cool, Jen. Jen grinned. You too, Rex. Maybe don't let your brother use that null void gun, though. Rex laughed as Jen took the scientist's arm and both strange people vanished. Six raised an eyebrow at him. At this point, I'm not questioning it. Tennysons are weird, no matter the universe, apparently. Six shook his head. Jen glanced at Paradox as blue lights flashed around them, as they always did when she traveled with him. What pulled me there? She asked, hoping for once he would be straightforward with her. Residual energy from the event that pulled Ben into Rex's timeline, without a focus, causing something similar to a feedback loop. When you closed the portal to the null void that the initial event created, you forced the loop closed, cutting off your own escape route. But your timeline still needs you, so I came back to collect you. Jen nodded. She wasn't going to ask, but the words spilled from her before she could stop them. Why did he look a lot like Ethan? Paradox frowned. Pure coincidence, I'm afraid. Jen nodded slightly as they landed outside her cousin's house. Kevin's car sat in the driveway. So she started, but her question died on her lips as she realized that Paradox had already vanished. Why does everyone do that? She grumbled, making her way to the door, which opened before she could reach it. Gwen raced out, closely followed by Kevin. Where have you your mana vanished entirely. You were gone. I swear if you do that to me again, I will hurt you. Gwen ranted as she pulled her cousin into a hug. So not my fault. Dimensional feedback loop. I got temporarily sucked into an alternate universe. But it's fixed now. She didn't say more as she stepped into the house. Kevin recognized the look on her face. Frustration at a mystery not yet solved. An answer just out of reach. He ruffled her hair.
Good to see you in one piece, Tennyson.
She nodded as she went to assure her parents that she was fine. Chapter 12. Translation. Fighting Animo was sort of fun. It was refreshing in a way Jen had never thought it would be. It was nice to fight someone who came out with their plan from the get-go, practically begged to be defeated. Gwen and Kevin were disassembling the de-evolution bomb, while Jen dealt with the Yeti and the doctor himself. It was easy as forearms. She was twice as strong as the thing and managed to break the headband Animo was using to control it. It took a few swipes at the good doctor before it walked away grumbling. Jen waved, and it waved her off dismissively. She shrugged and lifted Animo up by the back of his jacket. He pouted, then grinned. Ah, but you've forgotten my bomb! Jen turned so they were facing the structure, now in pieces. Kevin and Gwen were walking away from it, Kevin's toolbox under his arm. Yep, taken care of. Gwen called ahead as Jen threw Animo into the brig of the Rust Bucket 3, and they took off. The news that there was an alien smashing up downtown Bellwood had Kevin blasting them home in minutes. Pierce and a few others were working to contain the alien, but it wasn't going well. Pierce was the only one still standing when they arrived. He'd used one of his spikes driven into the ground to hold on against the assault. The rest of the plumbers scrambled to their feet. Jen pulled one up and nodded to him. We've got it from here. Take care of Animo. He's in the brig. They nodded and boarded the rust bucket as Kevin and Gwen attacked the giant turtle. Jen pulled Pierce up. What do we have? He shook his head.
Never seen anything like him. He's a powerhouse, too. Doesn't talk, though. Just growls.
Jen's attention was pulled away from her friend when an unfamiliar voice called out her name. Jen 10, savior of 100 worlds at last. Jen frowned as she turned to the turtle. Thought you said he couldn't talk. She muttered, but didn't listen to Pierce's response as she vaulted over the line of spikes he'd laid down and stood before the destructive alien. Jen held up her hands as Gwen and Kevin made to attack again. You know I have a cell phone, right? There are easier ways to get a hold of me than smashing up my town. The giant turtle looked down sheepishly. I am sorry, great hero. I was in desperation. I could not think of anything else. Jen glanced down as the Ultimatrix beeped. The turtle alien tilted its head at her, glowing yellow. Unidentified DNA detected. What does that mean? The turtle asked curiously. It means your species isn't in the Ultimatrix. Would you mind if She raised her hand and gestured to the device. I would be honored to be the example of my people. He bowed his head and allowed himself to be scanned. Kevin and Gwen made their way over to Jen, Gwen looking confused.
Since when do you speak turtle?
Kevin asked, and Jen frowned. What are you talking about? He's speaking English. Gwen slapped herself in the forehead. The Ultimatrix has a translator in it. You're hearing English, but he's not speaking it. He's speaking his native language, which we can't understand. She explained to Kevin, who nodded and pulled his badge out of his pocket.
Easy fix.
He pointed his badge at the turtle, and it glowed, a pulse traveling the distance. Jen didn't notice a difference, but Kevin and Gwen heard the grunting growls transform into well-spoken English. He bowed slightly. My name is Galapagos. Thank Adwacha I found you, Jen 10. I am in desperate need of your help. Jen nodded and glanced over her shoulder as cameras began to flash. Come on, you can tell us why you're looking for us back at base. Galapagos nodded and followed Jen into the Rust Bucket 3 without a fight. Kevin and Gwen and the other plumbers loaded up and headed to the base. It took Galapagos a few hours to explain everything he had been through, and it made Jen a bit nervous. Agrigor was a name they'd heard before from the alien Bivalvin, the red alien who'd stolen from NASA in an attempt to fix the busted escape pod. The plumbers agreed to take Galapagos home and considered the matter settled. Jen, though, didn't. She'd had Galapagos give her a basic description of the other 3 aliens who'd escaped. She frowned as she looked over her notes. Pulling out her comm unit, she checked the local call signals and called the Orlando plumbers. Plumber Base, this is Gen 10. I need to speak to Jerem. I'm sorry, Miss Tennyson. Jerem hasn't come back from his mission yet. I can have him call you as soon as he gets back, though. Jen nodded. Please do. Thanks. She hung up and shook her head. She had a bad feeling about this. She was able to find photos of the suit Pandor was being kept in, along with the other 2 aliens. They needed to find them and get them home as soon as they could. She sighed and uploaded the data to Kevin and Gwen, who were already out looking. Jen rubbed her temple. She hadn't been sleeping well again. This time, though, it wasn't feedback or Ghost Freak or the temporary loss of Grandpa Max that haunted her. No, it was the giant black dragon with red eyes from the vision she'd gotten off the book. She glanced at her phone. Gwen had texted her. She was on her way. The cousins would search together while Kevin went to check in with his mom. She insisted he check in with her once a week at least. Ever since the 2 had reunited, she hadn't been keen on letting her son out of her sight. Jen didn't blame her. She reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook Kai had written her translation of the old knight's journal in. Jen flipped it open to where she had left off. She'd read a bit farther after her call with Kai and Gregory. The knight had described the beast from her vision, with burning coal eyes, his rampage of destruction across the countryside. She flipped to her bookmarked entry and kept reading. The beast has laid many a night low, but perhaps my curse will prove a blessing here. Jen frowned. He'd mentioned a curse a few times before, but never elaborated on what it was, only that his child hadn't inherited it. Perhaps I can defeat this beast, but without permission from the king I can do nothing to assist the people. Her frown deepened. I am imploring him to let me set out alone to defeat the beast, to not waste more lives than we have to, but he has denied me so far. I will petition him again in the morning. He must be made to see reason, or I must break my oaths. I do not wish to do this. Breaking an oath is one of the worst things that a person can do, second only to the act of betrayal. I do not wish this life to be remembered as an oath-breaker. But if I must to save these people, I shall. Jen was starting to like this guy. She jumped as a hand landed on her shoulder. Gwen raised an eyebrow at her. You've been super jumpy lately. Are you okay? Jen nodded. I'm fine. Let's go find these aliens. She left the book in her bag in the trunk of her car as they set off to search the city.